All right, welcome to New Wine UnCorked. We're excited to be here for another episode, and one of many episodes that we'll have this week as well as upcoming weeks. I'm Matt Farlow, and I'm here with Phil Berlin.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Phil Berlin. I've been involved. I'm a current member of the AC for New Wine. Been involved with New Wine since my years at Multnomah Seminary, and I've been just really interested and excited about being a part of conferences and retreats and everything here. And now looking at this venture with New Wine UnCorked to have some just serious conversations about just how to look at the various things going on in culture from the perspective of a Christian, and just understand how the gospel interacts and how Christ's love interacts with the various things that are going on, and just looking at it from a Christian perspective. So that's what I'm here to do, and I'm looking forward to doing this along with Matt.
Yeah, and I'm totally stoked to. And for those of you that are watching, obviously, I'm white and Phil's black, so we're gonna obviously have those differences and perspectives. But like Phil was saying, he is a grad from Multnomah, and so am I, about 10 years earlier than Phil, so we've got that different perspective. And part of the thing that we're going to try to do with New Wine UnCorked is allow our perspectives to feed into the way in which we interact with those around us, but then also giving a perspective of, well, where is Christ for me? And not that there's a different Christ, a Jesus, but the way in which we have been allowed to, live life is different. I was talking with you, Phil, about the house that you live in, right? Isn't it the house that you grew up in?
Absolutely, yeah. We live in Portland, Oregon. I live in Northeast Portland. This is probably one of the most gentrified areas in the country, I'll probably say. My community was predominantly black when we grew up. All my neighbors, a good 80-90% of my neighbors, that's entirely flipped right now. A lot of new developments, apartment complexes, a lot of buildings that were abandoned back when I was growing up have been turned into brand new coffee shops and restaurants and the like. And very much the black community is not here nearly as much. So we moved back into the neighborhood just a few years ago. My mom owns a house in the area, and she never sold this house. So we were able to move back in, and my family, my children are able to grow up with a backyard and stuff like that. So it's been a cool experience moving back into the neighborhood, but it's been awkward at moments as well.
Yeah,
so getting to know kids, and my family and my kids don't go to school in the neighborhood as well.
Yeah.
Well, they will. My daughter will this coming year.
Yeah.
But it's been interesting moving back here.
And that's a weird, an interesting perspective, because so you have the perspective of with the house that you grew up in and coming back into the area. Is my family, I was born in Detroit, so I left Detroit early on, and then my wife and I were in California, and then we left, so we sold a house in Northern California. Everyone thought we were crazy. Why would you leave California to go do studies? And so we have moved around. And so it's interesting. And this is, I think, part of what we're excited about with New Wine UnCorked is allowing our different perspectives, and people's different perspectives, hearing from that, to understand that allows those experiences help us to become who we are, but all the while we're all the same, right? Created in the image of God. And so how does that play into it with what we're doing in interacting with some of these issues that are in front of us,
Mm-hmm.
And so we were talking earlier, and it's interesting with this weekend of how the church interacts, because it was a pretty big weekend as far as Juneteenth. And then you had the campaign rally for the president and things like that. And so we were talking about, the excitement of New Wine UnCorked is trying to step into these things with dialogue and how we go about doing that. And so I was wondering, too, what do you think will be some of the reasons why people react the way they do? How when some folks will protest and will say Black Lives Matter, then there's other groups that protest against that saying. And I'm always curious to know, where is the church, or what is the church's voice, or how would we bring faith into that? Because
absolutely.
How do we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And much of it begins with what you said just a moment ago. The fact that we're all made in the image of God, and respecting that and acknowledging just that, and that being made in the image of God, meaning that we have a sense of dignity, at least with one another,
Yeah.
to be able to respect one another's opinions, one another's just life in general, and then being able to look at a society of people and consistently see that life has been leaned against them for their entire existence, and to say, hey, for them to raise their hand and say, hey, our lives matter.
Yeah.
What are we talking about here?
Yeah.
And it's almost it's a real kind of protest against that movement to say, well, all lives matter too. Well, obviously, but your life hasn't been the one that's been life falling against it for the past 400 years. So it's definitely a thing, but how the church begins to it is where we enter the conversation understanding that we're all made in the image of God, and understanding that all of our voices matter when it comes to things, and allowing that voice to shape and mold how, in fact, we look at the scriptures, how, in fact, we understand God's presence among us, and how we understand theology in general.
Yeah.
So all those kind of things are the things that I believe that our faith and the church brings to this conversation.
Yeah, because it's weird how... and I'll be curious to see how this plays out, because trying to understand both sides. So I try to make sure that, I'm a news junkie. I don't know why I really like news so much. So this weekend, my family was just, they couldn't, because I had Friday, I listened to the Reverend Sharpton talk at the Juneteenth, and then Saturday I listened to the president talk at his rally, and so my family was like, just turn it off. And yet, I want to understand where everyone's coming from, as far as, these are the things that are pouring into them. And like you were talking about creation in the image of God, it's interesting to me how when you bring scripture into it, or you say, hey, we need to be praying through this, the things that are thrown at us when it comes to, but all lives matter, or, hey, we need to focus on just the social injustice, so Black Lives Matter protests what we need to focus on. And then, well, what about this? And I agree, like, well, what about this group, let's say for Pride Month, for the LGBTQ? And I wonder why people hear when, hey, our focus this month is going to be on, right now specifically, Black Lives Matter, so that next month we might focus on LGBTQ, or in this moment. I always am curious to know why that presses against people, and they say, well, if you're focusing on them, then you can't be focusing on me. And I wonder, like, if in the churches, they are forgetting to remind people of our Imago Day.
Yeah. I mean, in part, there is a level at least where, what was the phrase we used to use sometimes when we won? Whataboutism?
Yeah, exactly.
The phrase that we used.
Yeah, the isms.
Well, we do think, just what you said, because our focus is on one thing, that I'm being overlooked. And in many ways, that's the case. In particular, I was a part of a church for many years where I called the leadership narrow.
Oh, yeah.
Because there was kind of a single person that kind of ran the way the church went, and it was very difficult to get in that orbit, to say the least.
Yeah.
And it's very different to be a part of a church where that leadership is opened up, where the pulpit is opened up to different voices, and just where everyone seems to contribute. Because I think we all have an instinct that when it does come to the church, that we all contribute. And it's just kind of where we all contribute and we're all a part, but it just doesn't feel like that on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
When most of us are sitting in the congregation or sitting on the audience kind of watching the service happen. I think even right now, as we're sitting through this time of COVID, that we're seeing what is the church really doing with one another? How are we interacting? Do we just need that couple hours on Sunday morning, or is this actually a lifestyle in the community that we live throughout this time? So I'm seeing churches adjust to it, but it's just been a challenge, because I don't think our normal posture is to have everyone engaged and everyone interact outside of just sitting in the audience and listening and being a part of worship in that way.
Being almost like we're so used to being spoken at that now all of a sudden we're like, wait a minute, I need to rise up, and like silence is not an option. Silence is a response. And so. With the church especially, I just know when people, I think at least this is our experience, when you're bringing faith into it and everyone's cool with a little bit of scripture, like for instance, I can talk to Christian friends and say, hey, look, when we say Black Lives Matter, it's not a negation of all lives matter. In fact, it's the beautiful truth of all lives mattering. But like Jesus, when he, the parable of the sheep, right? The one sheep goes and needs his attention, or the prodigal son. The prodigal son returns. It's not that the father forgets about and pushes aside the older son, right? The younger son needs his specific attention, and so it's not a negation of everything. In fact, it's an embracing of the fullness of the body. And I think people, at least our experience, they nod their head and say, "Oh yeah, that's right." But then to ask them to live that out on a daily basis, they're like, "Well, wait a minute, though." Because if you focus on them, then you're not focusing on me, and it's like that. So whether it's COVID, or whether it's police brutality or Black Lives Matter, I feel like we miss the crux of our Imago Dei in the sense that relational image. We're created in a relational image, and so when one is struggling or suffering or in need, then we all are, whether directly or indirectly. And I think it's interesting, the care for the other. We say it in word, but to act it out in deed, it's like, well, I'll care for the other as long as it doesn't inconvenience me.
Absolutely. And just the notion that even more so than kind of how we see Jesus going to the margins for those who are lost in the light. But seeing that, the way we have ran society, the way it's played out in the church, and just all over, where, there are voices who've been quieted. We both had theological academic training, right? And 99% of the voices who formed our theology don't look like me at all.
I know.
Right? And then when we now find voices, but that's partly because those voices have been quelched throughout this history. Many of these issues and the like that we've talked about, whether it be in Hispanic circles, whether it be in African-American circles, whether it's Asian circles, have been talking about these kind of things for a long time and forming theology around these things for a long time. And at this moment, we're just now kind of bringing that into the fray of mainstream Christian thought and just kind of working through it. So,
it's weird too, because I think when I don't know why it is that I experience this with white people when they hear someone like, if you say something like, oh my gosh, the people that were doing theology didn't look like me, all of a sudden I feel the folks that I've interacted with, they feel like that's an attack. Like when you say that, for me, I go, dude, absolutely. Yes, this is what needs to happen, is the more voices. And yet there's a group of theologians, academics, and just church people who say, whoa, hey, Phil, be careful. Look, I'm not pushing you down and trying to hold you back and everything. It's like, but why do you hear that? Like, why is such a defensive posture? Because when Jesus was accused, and he was eating with the sinners, his response was, hey, you know what? We need to have more voices of the sinners around, the dinner table. He was just like, okay, if that's what you believe, why? And step in and ask. And that's where I think the questioning, and that's why I'm excited with New Wine UnCorked, is it's dialogue. If you look at the Greek put together of the word dia and logos, through the word, which has so much profound meaning when it comes to Christianity, the word Jesus, as well as the word scripture, but then the word that he gives to us, right? And I always find it fascinating when if a person who feels threatened by someone saying, oh, well, the voices in the past they didn't look like me, and now they need to be speaking out. If you get, defense about that, for me personally, that's a beautiful saying in the sense of, yeah, you're right. I need to step back so that the mosaic portrait of humanity cannot come through if it's always bottlenecked, And like you were going back to the church, isn't that how church has always been? The top down telling us, oh, we're the many. But if you speak up against the one, me telling you what it is. Yeah, exactly. And it's the one, that should be speaking through all of us, Jesus, so often gets drowned out then, right?
Absolutely. And I think even in addition, just looking at how we form our perspective of God and what the Christian life is about. All of our experiences contribute to pouring into what that is. One of the things, I know one of our favorite, for both of us, one of our favorite authors, Cornel West.
Yeah.
And he always talks about the gifts of Black folk, and alluding to the W.E.B. Du Bois book.
Yep.
But at the same token, he talks about just being dealt with a lifetime of suffering and responding to that suffering in love and teaching the world how to love, being the gift that Black folk give to America, being that, just this is the gift that Black folks give to America. And that, understanding how to live through that struggle, understanding how to live through when life doesn't give you what you expect, and being able to see God in the midst of it, and understanding how to lean and depend on God in the midst of it, that's something that doesn't necessarily play on Sunday morning all the time in certain churches.
Totally.
And at the same token, as you're going through seminary, it may not be a conversation you're having as well. In fact, it's a conversation that you're probably struggling to have.
Totally.
We talk about a theology of suffering and things along those natures, when the story of Black folk, that has been the story from the beginning. So. Yeah,
and I don't mean to sound cliche, because I'm going to bring up rapper Eminem, and people are gonna be like, oh, well, of course you like Eminem and all that stuff. And I've gotten to the point of like where, well, I've just gotten to the point in this conversation of, if someone accuses me of, because I'm this, oh, you like Eminem, he's a rapper because he's white. Well, I like Dr. Dre as well. I like rap in general. But I think for me, the defensive posture is just kind of has to fall away, because in humility, really, in saying, hey, I want to step into life with each other. And so if what I'm saying is you're just saying I'm doing this because of my whiteness, fine. If it's offensive and I'm doing that, then I need someone to speak into me, right? Otherwise, just don't accuse me of doing something just because you want to be accusatory, which is fine. I'm fine with that. But Eminem has a lyric in one of his songs where he says, look, these are the cards that I was dealt. I can either sit and piss and moan, or I can do something. And I think that's what I appreciate with Professor West, is that the cards that Black folks have been dealt over the 400 years, so you could sit back and just go, oh, woe is me, or and which has been done, is the perseverance, and he'll even bring up one of the ones when we were talking about this, where he's talking about the indigenous people and the original sin. He's like, well, it needs to incorporate the group of folks that when the Europeans landed on this continent, what did they do? They landed on, talk about a foot on the neck, or knee on the neck of a group, and bringing that into this story of we, because that's my story just as much as it is your story. And why, like, instead of it being an offense to us as a person, yes, let it be offense to us as relational beings that we're discarding people. But why be it an offense to the beauty of me? Like, how can I be full if I don't have your experiences? And I mean, I would love to have, if anyone who is ever watching this knows Professor West and they want to get him on here, dude, oh my gosh, that guy is a freaking dude. He is like the real deal, right? Like, every time he talks, I'm just like, record this, get this over here. Oh my God, come on. My son, every time he's on line, he searches for Cornel West, because, dude, we love him as a fan. Like, just the way he speaks, and he is so life-giving. And I'm like, that's what the church needs to be.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it's just and just speak to Cornel West. Since I was in high school, I was following him, and same. I have the same vibe too, where anytime he says anything, I wanna hear, because he just kind of exudes that humility, the love, just kind of frames everything. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of his as well. So.
Yeah, I love one of his sayings where he goes, we have to allow for the past to speak, because the love warriors who have gone before us. Yeah. And I don't know why it is when, and maybe it's because of the way that the Christian church is that it's never lived this out, this performance of love, that when Christians say, oh, it's about love, they go, well, what about this and what about this? And going back to a part of our earlier conversation, I'm curious to see, for people who really promote, oh, it's all about all lives matter, what are they going to do? And this is something that I'm excited to step into in these weeks ahead, is what about the idea or the truth of immigration? will all lives matter for the folks that are pressing into all lives matter now, when they're like, it's not just Black Lives Matter, it's all lives matter. Okay, what do we do with then immigration? Do those lives matter? Or then on the other side of the political spectrum, what about when it comes to abortion? Or even with both sides, healthcare and those things. So how far do we take the all lives matter on all sides of the issue? So that'll go into the one of the, I don't know if you read, he was a theologian, actually. Dr. Metzger studied under him, Colin Gunton, a professor from King's College before he passed away, and he talks how it really has to get back to origin. And that's creation. So what is the creation story, the foundation in which you move from?
Absolutely.
And I don't know if you've heard any of the lectures by Jordan Peterson. He's from Toronto. He's a crazy smart guy, but he talks a lot about the origin of the conflict, and he goes back to Cain and Abel. And then he goes and looks in the relationship between Jacob and Esau, and how there's this conflict of these brothers, which is an interesting thing too within the culture of the lack of, the awareness of the Me Too movement and things like that. Sometimes I wonder if the lack of touch then has happened between dads and sons. And when you start talking about dads and sons, a lot of people push back and say, oh, well, it's not just a gender thing, which I totally understand. But there is something to be said about boys learning how to roughhouse and be hugged, in today's culture, because I feel like we're so against touching, because it's been abused, as far as people over abusing their authority and their power, and then touch then all of a sudden becomes we're relational beings, and so then we become so standoffish that if a guy wants to grab and wrestle with his son, or even two friends, it's got to be the same with moms and daughters, right? There needs to be that constant touch, and so we've almost lost sight of our need of the other, and so Peterson goes into that, what is in the origin, the creation story, where touch has sort of been taken out of it, with Adam and Eve and the being expelled from the garden. Then did that change their, a husband and wife, did that change their relationship? Because then was there the wanting to blame? Oh, it was your fault that we got kicked out. No, it's your fault, and I wonder how too, with the lack of the church's voice with COVID-19, with Black Lives Matter, with social injustice, are we losing sight of the need for the other, to be in presence, to touch one another, and pressing into that? What does that look like? It's uncomfortable,
Absolutely. And there's definitely a thing where if me and my relationship with Jesus is okay and I'm going to heaven, then that's all Christianity needs to be about. You can educate and help me talk about that, but by and large, if me and God's okay, then that's it. Well, no, there's always the community that's around that we're developing in the body of Christ that's being grown. So, and that contributes to, we need those voices to help us all mature and grow up, right?
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yep. So, awesome. This is just a glimpse, and Phil and I are super stoked to do this on a consistent basis. And so, if you haven't subscribed to New Wine, right there below on this video is a little button right there that says New Wine. You subscribe to this, and in our descriptions you're going to see details for both Phil and myself, and we're excited. So if you want to contact us, go to Wineskins.org, and there's a place there where you can sign up and reach out to us, so that if you have ideas that you want us to talk about, I know Phil and I have been talking about we have exciting interviews coming up and discussions in the future. In this week and next week, we're going to be talking to another former Multnomah grad who wrote a book on talking to your kids about racism, which I'm stoked about that, So thanks for being with us for this episode. I'm Matt Farlow.
Bill Berlin. Good to see everyone, and it'll be fun talking to you.
Absolutely. This is New Wine UnCorked. We'll see you on the flip side.